When I was younger, I grew up in this old 1800s house in southern England, and even to this day, I still have occurrences in that house. I was around 4 or 5 when I started to realize just how messed up things were getting. Whenever I went to sleep, I would have these recurring dreams where I would start off in my room, which was at the top of the house, and make my way downstairs. You know that feeling you get as if someone is watching you, and you have that urge to turn around and check. I remember always having that feeling, making my way downstairs, and whenever I did check, I would see these different ghosts. The first, the ghost of this small Victorian child, wearing attire from a century I had never seen outside of this dream being so young, stood just outside my room in the corner. Down the first flight of stairs, and I would see this woman who stood with her back to me, dressed entirely in an old black, tattered dress. As I approached her, she slowly turned around, and I saw she had really wide eyes, and her smile would stretch across her entire face. The first two didn't hurt me, just screamed at me, or would run into me, and then the dream would continue. The final ghost was at the bottom of the second flight of stairs by the door. In my dream, I would sit at the bottom and wait until a figure appeared behind the glass and would begin bashing the door until it swung open or was forced off its hinges, depending on the night. This ghost was of a man incredibly broad and very tall. He was balding around 50 with rough hands. I don't know why, but he was the most vivid in my dream. He would pull out a knife and he would slowly push it into my belly. I could feel it cutting into my gut. I would try screaming, but I would be silent. I tried punching and kicking, but I had no force behind my movements. And then, as I could feel things get darker, the entire environment in my dream would spin into a whirlpool, and I drowned to death. And that's when I would wake up. I would have this recurring nightmare every day for about 5 months straight, hence why they became so easy to remember. As the years went on, my 2 older brothers would talk to me about various experiences when they happened. For one brother whose room was right next to mine on the top floor, he had a friend around, and when going upstairs and looking through the crack in the door to see his friend sitting on his bed, he also saw the ghost of this Victorian girl standing behind his friend. When going into the room and confronting his friend, neither found any trace of another person in the room. My other brother, after having a shower and peering through the glass pane on the bathroom door, saw his friend standing by the stairs with a figure of a tall, broad man standing next to him. Upon asking his friend, revealed that they were alone in the house, as my brother had left 10 to 15 minutes prior. My friend has heard cries and laughter of a woman around the house on the second floor, inside one of the master bedrooms. I have come to realize that the ghosts I saw in my dreams were being seen by family and friends in the house and waking life. And I've also come to realize that me being so young, I might have thought I was sleeping, but maybe I was actually sleepwalking around the house at night and seeing these spirits that inhabit my home before blacking out or finding my way back to bed. I have been caught sleepwalking before, and sleep paralysis was regular for me as a child up until about 10 years old. Creepy stuff. My whole family are very sensitive to witnessing paranormal activity, and I've had a bunch of other experiences in my house. For me, it happens all the time. I like a good ghost story, so here's one for you. It's a little long, but bear with me. When I was younger, there were these series of books called Haunted Philippines and True Philippine Ghost Stories that contained ghost stories and paranormal experiences from various people across the country. Some stories were in English, while the rest were in Tagalog. They were quick to read and had numerous volumes. Sometimes they even had a section of ghost pictures near the end. You know the kind. Nonchalant landscape or family pictures with a blurry figure circled in red. Some of them actually looked convincing, downright creepy. I loved that series, though. I should have enjoyed them while they lasted. As of last year, they seem to have been discontinued and are difficult to find in bookstores now. To me, these books were just good entertainment. Growing up in the Philippines provided no shortage of ghost stories and mythical legends. It seemed like everyone had a story to tell or knew someone who had one. I've had a handful of relatives in my family who claim to have had encounters with a ghost or multo, as we called them in our native tongue. I never thought I'd have my own stories to share, but that quickly changed very recently. My family and I had recently taken a trip back to the Philippines. It was long overdue, as I had not seen my relatives and my home country in several years. It was a bit strange to see all my younger cousins grown up. It was a great experience just to see them all again and spend time with them. On our first week there, we were on our way back to my aunt's house from a long day of shopping when the conversation in the car turned to supernatural occurrences. Our culture is heavy on religion and tradition, and we can be very superstitious at times. There are numerous stories of mythical monsters in Filipino culture, and hearing about them from my parents and relatives only furthered my interest. They included such things as the Tik Balong, which was a monster that frequented the forests and the mountains. It is described as a large humanoid creature with the head and limbs of a horse. So, basically BoJack Horseman. The Cop Ray was more of a tale for kids. It's described as a tall, troll-like creature that resides in large trees where it smokes a cigar waiting to scare off children that are out too late at night. He's usually regarded as non-violent, though. Another one is a Tyonic, and they're the stuff of nightmares. In remote areas near forest, you'd hear the faint crying of a baby. If you followed these sounds deep into the woods, it could lead you to be perpetually lost. Or if you were really unlucky, you'd find the source. You'd stumble upon what looks like a baby on the ground, but in actuality, it's a small ghastly creature that will transform and eat you if you got too close. Then there's the Aswang, a shapeshifter that feeds on human flesh at night. A specific species of them called a manananggal, which translates literally to remover, is a particularly terrifying one. By day they are in the form of a regular woman, but by night they feed. They root their legs to the ground. As their top half detaches itself, sprouts bat-like wings and takes flight. They mainly target pregnant women, and they have a long vine-like tongue that slithers down and eats the fetus as they hover right outside the window. I know. Pretty crazy stuff, right? I've always regarded these tales with a healthy amount of salt and the full dose of fear. They were cool and unique, but I could happily live the rest of my life not encountering any of them if they were indeed real. Even when I moved to America, I was still wary of those regional creatures. Anyways, during the car ride, my cousins spoke of strange sightings and experiences they've all had, all with varying degrees of believability and silliness. My dad relates some tales from his younger years about how his group of friends would encounter this and that. He was always ever so dramatic with his storytelling. It was all in good fun, but throughout the whole conversation, my mom remained quiet. She was the hard, skeptic type, and would always dismiss those stories of silly folklore. However, at that moment, it looked like she had something to say. My curiosity took over, and I finally asked her if she had ever had any ghostly encounters. She just looked at me and nodded back. During her college years, when she was studying to be a nurse, she lived on the campus of a very old school not too far from the city I was born in. Living conditions were pretty rough, and 4 of them had to share a room half the size of a normal American college dorm. On top of that, the campus used to be an infirmary during World War II. Hundreds of soldiers from both sides passed through and died within the walls of that hospital. Residents of the dorms would speak of strange noises in the night. Footsteps, faint echoes, and knocking were heard in certain parts of the building. There were rumors the place was also a temporary orphanage at one point in time, and that a handful of children had died there. They said you could hear children's laughter in the walls if you listened closely on more than one occasion. My mom and her roommates would wake up to faint shuffling noises in the room, like someone small was moving about. When they looked around, they wouldn't see anyone, so they dismissed it and went back to sleep. It wouldn't be until the following morning that they saw what looked like footprints on the walls and ceiling. They were the size of a child's. One of her roommates moved out after that. One night, a close friend of my mom was heading back to her room after a late-night study session. She was wary of the supernatural, so she kept her head down and walked quickly through the halls. As she passed by one of the empty rooms, something caught her eye. That large room used to be a triage area when the place was still hospital. The old rested beds were left there abandoned, and the room was used for storage. She said she saw half a dozen men lying on the beds. They looked injured and bandaged, and they wore looked like the uniform of an American soldier from World War II. She stood frozen in place as she felt the coldest chills she'd ever experienced in her life. Then one of the soldiers sat straight up and slowly turned towards her. That was enough to snap her back to her senses, and she took off running towards her room. When she got to her dorm and told her friends what she saw, the brave ones of the group headed to the room to investigate. But when they got there, all the beds were empty. Ever the skeptic, my mom didn't put much stock into these stories. That's until one early morning when she experienced something that challenged her stance and bothers her to this day. In the mornings before classes, my mom would wake up extra early so she could get first dibs on the showers in the community bathrooms. It wasn't too hard, since a lot of the residents had convinced themselves that the place really was haunted and were unwilling to venture out of their rooms that early. My mom mostly ignored the stories, and she always got to class early. That morning, she did her usual routine, and it went off without a hitch. As she was walking back to her room, she heard it. She said it sounded like whispers. She stopped and turned around. Down the hallway, a figure stood just at the edge of the darkness. The lights weren't in the best condition in that wing, so it was dim. Still, my mom could discern that the figure was dressed like a nun. That didn't make any sense, since there were no nuns on campus, and the nearest church was several miles away. Staying completely calm, my mom turned and walked away. She quickened her pace, and her own footsteps echoed in the empty hall. She strained to hear any other noises, but heard none. When she turned right to another hallway, she saw the nun from the corner of her eye. It was closer and definitely following her. As she got closer to her dorm, she turned around once more. The nun was at the end of the hall, just as far away from her as when she had first seen it. The nun stood still as if she'd been standing there the whole time. My mom quickly reached her door and struggled to unlock it. Daring one more look, she turned to her left, but the nun was gone. Relieved, she turned the lock. As she did, she moved to pick up her stuff and felt an unnaturally cold chill. She slowly looked right, and it was right there. The nun, on the other end of the hall. Except now she was much closer and fully in the light. On instinct, my mom turned the knob and threw her door open, and that's when the child ran out. A small, kindergarten-age child ran out of her dorm room, brushed past her leg, and ran towards the nun. The child was laughing innocently as if playing a game of tag. My mom watched as the child ran past the nun and disappeared into another room. After a few moments, the nun turned and followed the child. My mom asked around after that experience and learned that the last time there were children or nuns in the campus was back when it was a temporary orphanage several years ago. They shut it down after a tragic fire killed a dozen children and a few nuns looking after them. She never experienced anything else out of the ordinary after that. After she told that story, we all sat, stunned in our seats. My mom had been holding out on me. I was thrilled, but also terrified of what I just heard. See, at the time I had a passive interest in the paranormal. It wasn't anything serious, and nowhere near obsession levels. I wasn't out to prove that the afterlife existed, nor was I determined to find out if ghosts and spirits were real, to find some sort of meaning in this chaotic world. Did I believe in the supernatural? Not really, but I'd be open to the possibility. My interest in the subject was purely recreational, like someone who enjoys horror movies or knitting sweaters. In fact, while I like reading up on urban legends and enjoy hearing ghost story, I also terrified by them. My imagination fueled by stuff I've read and scary movies I've watched, would always get the better of me. When I'm home alone or alone in the dark, it was a sort of interesting paradox, kind of like how one point in my childhood I was fascinated by snakes as animals, but I was deathly afraid of encountering one out in the wild. And to be honest, I was still a little bit jealous of my mom that she had such a cool story to tell. I wished at the moment I had my own story. Well, you know what they say about being careful what you wish for. Yeah. Later on in the trip, we visited my uncle who lived a few towns over there. He lived with his family, where he ran a very lucrative farming business. On the way there, we passed a long bridge that went over a steep ravine with a river below. As our car rode along the bridge, I couldn't help but sense déjà vu. I mean, it made sense since I traveled over this bridge many times before when I visited my uncles and cousins. However, underneath that feeling was a sense of unadulterated fear and dread, like something bad had happened here, and somehow directly affected me. A distant memory screaming to be remembered as if on cue. My dad pointed out that this bridge was the infamous one, where the surrounding towns and cities talked about all the time because of the White Lady. Now, like the Capri or the Tick belong. The White Lady is another one of the ubiquitous ghost stories told all around the country. She is perhaps the most well-known, since different countries also have their own version. In America, she's usually called the Lady in White. In Spanish culture, she's La Llorona. The basic idea remains the same. A ghostly-looking woman dressed in a long white dress and long dark hair stands on the side of isolated roads waiting to hit a ride. The scenarios vary, but in the Philippines, if you stopped and gave her a ride, she would quietly enter your back seat. If you don't interact with her, she'll leave you alone until she disappears from your car some distance later. If you see her on the road, keep driving. She will suddenly appear in your car and attack you. Moral is it's better to give her a ride than to not. When we arrived at my uncle's large house, I couldn't shake the feeling the bridge had somehow directly affected me. After a delicious dinner and a round of video games with my cousins, I found my uncle out in the balcony having a drink. He offered me a beer since I was finally old enough, and I took a seat next to him. "Hey Tito, do you remember anything about that bridge right outside of town?" He put his drink down and regarded me for a few moments, and then he cut straight to the chase. "You were really young when it happened. I suppose you didn't remember it much now." I was fully intrigued. I had to know. What exactly happened? His warm smile faded, and he told his tale. As the story went on, the memories began to flood my mind. Memories that I had long since repressed. As a defense mechanism, all the details came to me in excruciating clarity, as if it happened just yesterday. By the time he had finished the story, there was no denying it. I had encountered a ghost all those years ago. It was in the mid-90s, and I was still living in the Philippines. I was a plucky 6-year-old that was all about adventure and exploring. Once or twice a week, I would spend the night at my uncle's farm. Back then, a small bedding business. The town it was in was similar then, smaller though, and fairly remote. I love that place because there are so many areas to explore, but only in the daytime. One particular night, I was over at his place just watching TV. My uncle got a call of a new delivery of chicken feed that needed to be picked up in the next town. At the time, he only had a few farmhands, and they all had the night off. Usually he wouldn't make a supply run this late at night, but he was behind schedule and needed to pick up the supplies or risk losing profit. As he had a note, he asked me if I wanted to tag along. Ever the restless child, I immediately agreed. My uncle had an old Toyota SUV that he used for all his delivery pickups. I sat in the second row, my usual spot, while my uncle slid into the driver's seat. Most of the voyage was uneventful. It was nearly 11 p.m. at night, so there was hardly any other vehicle on the road. Upon crossing the bridge the first time, nothing happened. During that time, the bridge was newly constructed. It was put up the year before, or after the original bridge was ravaged by the last typhoon. The city even put streetlights on the new bridge for better visibility. That was a huge deal since none of the other surrounding roads had streetlights. We arrived at the next town, and I helped my uncle load up the supplies. Well, at least as much as a small 6-year-old can. On the way back home was when it happened. I was sitting in the back seat, absent-mindedly looking out the window, when I felt the car slow down. We were almost at the bridge, and I noticed something wasn't right. I was too small to see over the seat and out the windshield, but I could tell that all the lights on the bridge were off. At this point, the car slowed to a crawl. "Hey, sport, why don't you lie down and take a little nap?" my uncle said from the front. Something in his voice didn't sound right. It sounded like he was scared and was struggling to hide it. "No, that's okay, I'm not tired," I said. "Please, just do it for me, okay?" He sounded stern but measured. My uncle is usually easygoing guy, so when he got serious, he knew you should pay attention. "Okay," I said as I laid down on the seat. I briefly saw my uncle's eyes in the rearview mirror. They showed unmistakable fear. I felt the familiar bump that signaled that we were on the bridge, and then the car stopped. "Close your eyes, okay? No matter what. You keep them closed, okay?" I said. I started to get scared. I didn't know what was happening or why I had to close my eyes, but regardless, I shut them tight, and then the strangest thing happened. My uncle started to sing. It was a traditional Filipino folk song, and I'd only heard it once before, about a year ago. My aunt and uncle got into a shouting match, as in a things were thrown across the room type of shouting match. Yeah, I was at their house at the time, and my cousins and I stayed in their room, cowering and waiting for the storm to pass. An hour later, my uncle entered the room and apologized for the shouting. He then started singing that song to Lola's to sleep. The melody was beautiful, and I had never known my uncle could sing that well, and he never did it again. At least not until that moment when we were on that dark bridge. The song sounded just as beautiful, but I could tell his voice was shaking. His car wasn't that big, but I was a small child, and there was a lot of room in the second row. I was lying down on the seat perpendicular to the windows, trying and hoping for sleep to come. But instead, something else arrived. Click, click. I heard the familiar mechanism of the headlights flashing. All of a sudden, I sensed that I wasn't alone in the second row anymore. My spatial awareness of the car told me that there was someone or something else sitting right next to me. We had gained another passenger. I shut my eyes even tighter as my uncle began to drive. The temperature inside the car became cold. I curled myself into a ball, seeking refuge from whatever it was that was now right next to me. I didn't know much about ghosts and supernatural creatures at that age, and though I couldn't see it, something told me that I was in the presence of something that was not of this world. My uncle finished the song and started over again. I was amazed that he was able to keep his composure. I refused to open my eyes. I could hear her, so uncomfortably close next to me. At first I heard what sounded like clicking. As it increased in volume, it sounded like stalks of celery being twisted and broken. Crack, 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 crack. It was unnerving. Those sounds weren't normal, and they were all around me. We finally crossed the bridge, but she was still there. I was so scared I could barely move. The car hit a bump, which caused me to slide to the side, closer to her, and I felt damp cloth against my leg. My breath became shallow, and I began to cry. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I opened my eyes for a split second. And in that split second, I saw her. A brief flash of white, stringy, damp hair on her head, blacker than night. She was turned away from me. I blinked the tears from my eyes, and when I opened them again, the mass of black hair was now right in front of my face. I shut my eyes tight again. After what seemed like an eternity, the car hit a familiar curve on the road that signaled the entrance to our town. I felt that entity come even closer to me. By this time, my uncle was silent. No more songs. The air became even colder right next to my face, and I shook, not from the cold, but from terror. And then she spoke, right into my ear. It was a hushed whisper, lower than any whisper I've ever heard. I couldn't make out what she said. It didn't sound threatening or angry. It sounded sad, and then she was gone. I immediately felt the difference. I can no longer feel another presence in the car, and the air went from cold to tropical humid again. I heard my uncle breathe a sigh of relief. I didn't open my eyes until we reached the safety of the farm. My uncle had to carry me back inside and straight into bed, and only then did I open my eyes. From what I could recall, we never spoke of that night to anyone, not even to each other. Ever again. Subsequent trips across the bridge at night never resulted in another white lady sighting, at least not for me. I would find out later that in the early 80s, a woman was found dead at the bottom of that bridge. People said that she was traveling to the next town, was hoping to catch a ride with any passing vehicles. It was late at night, and she had no family nearby that could give her a ride. No one knows what really happened, but many suspect that it was murder. After my trip back to the Philippines, I couldn't stop thinking about that night at the bridge. How could I forget such an incredible and terrifying experience? I guess it doesn't matter since I remember it now, but there was something else I realized about that night. Something I hadn't remembered before. When I heard her whisper, I thought I only heard unintelligible garble, but that's not true. She did say something. She said, "Maraming, salamat." This experience happened at least 7 years ago, a brief prequel, but our house has already been confirmed to be haunted, with all the sightings having the same descriptions, despite the large variety and time and relation to the family. All of these reports describe an elderly woman presumed to have been the former owner of the house, dying overseas, before it was taken over by her descendant. Paranormal activities have been very normal to me since I was a child, with nearly everyone in my family being spiritually aware and with our mutual love for the unseen world. One night, we had more guests over than our spare bedroom could fit, so I gave up my room and slept in my old bed in my parents' room. It was not your traditional master bedroom setup. My parents' bed was on the northeastern corner, facing down northwest, and right before the southeastern cabinets was a large vanity mirror with raised wooden platforms for holding bottles of lotion, cologne, cotton, and jewelry. My bed was on the southwestern corner, facing up to the northwest, so my head was toward the northern part of the room with the vanity mirror clearly in sight. I woke up from my sleep somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning, and I saw a few dim embers on the topmost platform of the vanity mirror. I was astounded at first, wondering if it was a reflection of any red light source within the room. A few minutes later, I could make out the shape of two creatures with a specifically shaped ember forming a head torso and its extremities. They soon started moving on the platform as if searching for something. At this point, I was still skeptical about the situation, opting to think that a red light source from the oscillating fan gave birth to these imaginary creatures. But no, a few seconds later, I could clearly see them hold on to the platform's edge and drop down the lower platform. They moved in a rather comical way, as if arguing about something and constantly hitting each other. The two continue looking around and dropping lower and lower. By the time they reached the bottom platform, their lights had grown considerably dimmer, and after a while they departed to a corner blocked by my mom's watch case. The next morning, I immediately ran to the vanity mirror to look for evidence, even just a tiny burn mark to prove what I saw. Yet still, it says if nothing has ever happened. I don't know what I saw. Do you? In November of 2018, my sister, dad, and I moved out of this old house and moved where we are now. I think this house is haunted due to lots of reasons. When we first moved here, I woke up at around 12:30 in the morning to a light switch going on-off. On-off. I was really scared at this point because this type of crap happened the old house, which was also haunted. I woke up to tell my dad what happened and he was like, "Huh, that's weird. This happens all the time now, and when it happens, I usually don't think anything of it anymore." In December, I woke up to one of my dogs jumping on my bed. I got up and noticed that the door next to my bed next to the furnace was open. My room is in the basement. I was shaking. I was about to go in there, and then I just thought, hell no, so I got up and closed the door, and then I heard the light switch on, then off almost immediately. At this point, I didn't fall asleep again for almost 2 hours. A few weeks ago, I was home alone. My dad was off at my sister's dance practice. I was drawing in my room, and I heard a door open upstairs. I ran upstairs to greet my sister and dad, but they weren't home. At this point, I almost called 911 because I was so freaked out. Around 2 weeks ago, I woke up to somebody doing the dishes at 4 in the morning. I fell asleep shortly after because I was exhausted and didn't think much of it until I realized that nobody's awake at 4 and no one does the dishes at 4 in the morning. So when I was about 8 years old, I was laying in bed and I saw this little person come walking across my sheets towards me. He was all white like a ghost, but the size of an action figure. And naturally, I freaked out and told it to leave me alone, but I don't think it did. Things happen that I can't explain. When I'm using a remote control, the channel either go one higher or lower, without me ever touching it. While I'm using my phone, there are times when I get so frustrated because things won't work. It's like someone else is touching the screen at the same time. Just little annoyances that I notice and try to brush off, but it's getting harder and harder to do that. The one thing I notice the most is that when I'm laying in bed, and if anyone has pets, you know how it feels when they walk on the bed. The motions around your legs tell you something is moving, but nothing is there yet. I feel that all the time. Even when it's not my dog in the pitch dark, I have felt hands touching my feet. I am really starting to believe that someone's placed a curse on me or attached a fiend to me that loves to annoy the hell out of me with these little things that just get to me. I'm trying to explain this without sounding like a crazy person, but I know I feel something walking on the bed at times when I'm laying down. I do have a small dog that sleeps with me every night. Her name is Samantha, and she was my mother's until she passed away, and there are times when she growls at nothing. Having her walk on the bed taught me how it feels when something else is walking on it when I'm laying down. This happens almost every night, even when Samantha's sleeping right next to me. Other things happen as well, but it's the small annoyances that are the worst. Finally getting on the right channel, only to have it switch again without touching it. Turning sound off on my phone, only to have it turn back on seconds later without touching it. Having my phone in my pocket, and suddenly it's calling somebody on my contact list, which wouldn't be that weird, except it calls somebody way further down in the last person I called. I'll put my phone away after talking to somebody, and a minute later I hear, "Hello, hello," from my pocket, and it's somebody on my list that was nowhere near the person I last talked to. So many times, my phone has called out to people as I'm carrying it or have it in a pocket, fingers nowhere near the screen, so nothing should be able to press send a call. I could put my phone away after playing Candy Crush, and a minute later, it's calling somebody from my pocket. So how does that work? The walking feeling I get when I'm laying on my bed is what's making me believe I'm haunted or cursed, that there is an invisible entity attached to me that does little things to drive me crazy. Has anyone else ever had something like this happen? And if so, how would you get it to stop? I'm seriously making going crazier by the day. My bedroom door is slightly ajar until just a moment ago when it fully closed by itself. The click was as loud as it could be. The little metal part popped back out into its little hole in the wall. Damn. I must know I'm talking about it. My dream is that the more I talk about it, the sillier it'll seem and it'll just go away. But I doubt I'm not lucky. By itself, this story sounds crazy. I know I probably should have started by telling you that I'm an empath destined to be a medicine man. Since I was a child, I've seen shadow people and have been able to guess the things that are about to happen, and then they do. I fought hard to fight against it, not having anyone around who can teach me why I see the things I see or know the things I know. It has just scared me growing up, and now it's too late to try and learn, I think. But if anyone else had experiences like mine and has gotten help, I surely would appreciate any advice. My great-grandmother lived with my family at our old house. We had built an addition onto the house so she could have her own kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, etc. After her death, we boxed up her belongings, which included her Bible and various other books and knickknacks, and I ended up moving into that addition since I was the oldest child still living at home. About a month or so after she died, I was home alone. I had just gotten home from school and decided to watch television in the family room. I settled down, turned on the TV, and proceeded to chow down on a bag of chips. An hour or so goes by, and I hear what sounded like a door slamming down at the addition. My first instinct was to see if my brother was at home without my knowledge, since he had a bad habit of slamming doors. I started down the hall towards his room. I never had the chance to open his door. Farther down the hall in the addition, I saw a person head directly towards my bedroom. It was at this point that I had to fight the incredible urge to shit my pants. I knew there was an axe murderer in the house, and that it was going to be up to me to stop them. I entered my brother's room and grabbed the first weapon I could find, which, unfortunately, was a plastic lightsaber. I slowly crept towards the addition. The closer I got, the colder the air around me felt. It was the strangest feeling ever. I slowly entered my room and saw nothing. I had seen enough movies to know that the axe murderer was in one of two places, either under my bed or in my closet. I checked under the bed first. Nothing. And then flung open the closet doors, fully expecting axe versus plastic lightsaber battle, but was thankfully disappointed. I began to creep around the addition looking for signs of a break-in. I found nothing along those lines, but what I did find creeps me the hell out to this day. On my great-grandmother's couch, the couch she sat on every day that I can remember, I found her open Bible, the same Bible that we had boxed up a few weeks earlier.